Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to the World Below. In completing the recent crowdfunding campaign for the Delver's Guide and Secrets of Calm and Chaos, I received many requests for videos from people who backed that campaign at the hardcover level. Thank you so much to everyone who did. It was absolutely wonderful to see so much support. We were never expecting figures, to parallel the release of a core rulebook or something like that, and we're not releasing deluxe versions of these books. This was a print on demand and PDF. And given that, the fact that we were able to raise $16,000 for these two books is absolutely fantastic and wonderful for me to see the support. The World Below, a game that I conceptualized and I've developed and written with a team of fantastic co-authors, come to fruition and find a fan base, is just wonderful. So thank you so much for everyone who backed the Buried Treasures campaign. Now, Jacob got in touch with me, and as you will have just seen by my face lighting up, I just needed to double check the name. Jacob wanted some more lore on the community of Zilenz. Zilenz is one of the communities you could be from in the world below. Your character could come from Zilenz. Your character could quite easily be one of the monks who travels around the world below, a Zilenzian. And if you are, what kind of character would that make you? And what would you know about your community? Well, Zilenz is a very interesting community because it wasn't always nomadic. Once upon a time, this community was a fixed settlement, but a disaster drove them from their ancestral base. It's actually in their ancestral base that they developed their reverence for ice, for cold, for water. They tend toward the fluid and the cold and the freezing elements because their settlement, which was once upon a time quite deep in the granite stratum, was on a shelf of ice overlooking a clear lake that never froze despite all else. The ice was a brilliant ward against many of the burrowing and attacking roving hordes that exists in the world below. It offered them little cover and a little purchase as well. And the Zilenzians could live in cracks in the ice, and they could form their habitats within those cracks and fissures, and they could actually keep them quite warm because the ice very rarely melted. But when you were above it and trying to maneuver within it, it was very easily, chilling, shall we say. The temperature, the ambient temperature in the caves that made Zilenz up was utterly destructive to anyone who wasn't familiar with or protected against the harshness of these elements. So the Zilenzians, back when they were a static settlement, were quite content to nestle within the ice, to find magical ways of protecting themselves, to find the warmest quarters within the frigid area in the granite stratum where they emerged. But all good things must come to an end. Even then, they were monastic. They were quite a reclusive settlement. They were far from any of the other granite settlements. In a windward direction, on the other side of the lake, was a massive gulf of chaos portals that could basically suck people up into vortexes and drop them elsewhere throughout the world below. But as I say, all good things come to an end. And the good thing that came to an end was the ice shelf started melting. The thing is, the people of Zilenz don't know why the melt began. This was 3-4 generations ago, but it was rapid and it was destructive, and it was also unheralded. What's more, it didn't even occur when most people would expect it to during the calm season. This was during exploration, so most of the sturdiest, strongest Zilenzians were out exploring, foraging, scouting ahead, and making tentative links with other settlements and communities. So there weren't many people left behind in Zilenz to reinforce the settlement. And this meant that when those parties returned to Zilenz, they found their settlement in a completely desolate state. Now, many people would reject their faith. Their reverence for the ice would suddenly break off, brittle, but this only reinforced it. They became convinced that they had somehow failed the ice, that they'd let some interloper in, some monstrous force, or maybe they should have channeled their chaotic energies better. But they took it as a sign. They needed to work for the cold's favour. And so they left Zilenz, which was becoming an enormous freshwater lake of, well, filled with icebergs as well. There were some parts that just wouldn't melt. And they started their travels. Now, Zilenzians have always been masters at riding mounts. Given how far away they were from other settlements in the world below, it would have almost taken an entire exploration season to reach the nearest settlement. So, if they were on foot, so they had to learn how to mount, ride, tame giant bugs. The giant bugs that infested the areas around ancient Zilenz were typically of a scorpion variety. They were arachnid, but they would have large claws at the front and typically tails. Unlike scorpions, these tails wouldn't arc up behind them. They would actually break off into multiple strands behind them. It was just they're strange creatures. They're not actually called scorpions. They're scorvenox, and they have their aggression at front with their pincers, but their true threat is behind. Should anyone try sneaking up behind a scorvenox, because there's a lot of meat underneath that carapace, the tail would just burst into 10, 20 different strands that would lash like whips and paralyze you, at which point it would slowly turn and begin to devour you while you are still alive but unmoving. The Zilenzians were very good at actually taming these creatures. They had a form of communication that the Scorvenox were able to understand, and for whatever reason, maybe again, that common reverence for the cold, the two found common cause. And so even now, Zilenzians, when they ride into battle or ride to explore, they're often riding Scorvenox. Some Scorvenox are neutered in the sense that their tails get braided into one long strand. Now, this is no less paralytic and no less deadly with it. It is, in fact, a large tendril-like tail. But if you see a Scorvenox that has all of its tails braided together, that tends to mean there is an owner somewhere nearby, and if you happen to mistreat the Scorvenox, you will run afoul of the Zilenzians. The Zilenzians themselves are monastic still, at least to all appearances. They revere the elements. They keep their own counsel. They are ascetic. They don't believe in acquiring a great many possessions, but that's because they're always on the move more than anything else. And they are also law masters. You see, they are determined to map the world below, despite its ever-shifting form. They're practically a guild unto it themselves. They're not really a caravan. They're more of a discipline. You see, they believe that if they can map sufficient parts of the world below, they can find the next most frigid place and they won't make the same mistakes that they did last time, whatever those mistakes were. And so they are very reluctant to actually reveal their inner workings, their past, their ambitions with other people from other settlements. They'll work with them, they'll even befriend them, but they are quite secretive about it. There are some, the elder Zilenzians, who believe that the best way to appease the great ice is to actually let it into other settlements, let the cold in to other communities, essentially bring about these Arctic conditions for other people who may not want them, but the Zilenzians believe are purifying. It provides quite a contrast because there's quite a few people in the world below who believe that fire and chaos are the great purifiers. Zilenzians believe quite the opposite. The only way to preserve the world below, the only way to keep people safe, is to erect the wall of ice that will divide you from the monsters. And so the Zilenzians are expert cartographers. They're expert beast tamers. They're excellent. They're expert nomads, and they know how to survive. They aren't particularly adept yet at surviving in the wilds during chaos storms. Calm seasons are where they have struggled the most. They've gone from being a static settlement, a static reclusive settlement, to within living memory becoming masterful nomads. And certainly during exploration seasons, they can move great distances and find secure habitats. But when they are left exposed to the chaos, it isn't something many of them are hugely used to. And so that is one of the reasons they do go to other settlements and other communities for safe harbour, and is likely to represent a thawing of relations between the Zilenzians and other inhabitants of the world below, as eventually people realise this is what the Zilenzians need, our sanctuary. Now, what can the Zilenzians give us, whether it's tips on cartography, on beast taming, or similar? Like many monastic groups, they eschew large weapons and the idea of having to forge weapons. Again, all of that is something that they would have done in the past, and even then, smiths weren't terribly common in ancient Zilenz. Rather, they discipline their bodies to become the best material, the most lethal material they can. Many of them wear gauntlets that are studded with gems. They're particularly fond of sapphires and diamonds for their symbolic nature, and the gem master calling is increasingly common within Zilenzian communities. So, with all of that said, I hope that that is sufficient lore for you, Jacob, and if any of you have played a Zilenzian or are interested in doing so, please comment below. Likewise, if there are any settlements or communities you want to hear about from the world below, I would love to hear your thoughts. Zilenz, of course, can be found in the Curseborn, in the World Below core rulebook. They're not in Curseborn. But you can pick up the World Below core rulebook, and I'd appreciate it if you did, because I gain royalties from sales of this one. It is linked in the video description below. Until next time, I'll be seeing you.